The other thing is you need to know the story well enough to tell it, but you don't need to know it word for word. If you think about retelling a story and you focus on, have I got the characters in my mind right? Do I know where it's happening, which you're going to have to know anyway in order to set the setting? And do I know what happens? Then that's not a bad framework. That's your general basis of a good retelling as you're setting your characters and your events. And the other thing you can do is, if you're concerned about it and you want to link this to your literacy, have 3 or 4, 5 if necessary, long strips of card with just pointers about what's happening, and just say, you know, and Jesus went to Lake Galilee, and lay down, Jesus went to Lake Galilee, and the disciples joined him. And the disciples joined him. So, you know, the disciples came or whatever. So you actually begin to tell your story, and then they can go up and become a sequencing activity or a literacy activity or a drawing activity or something later. In getting into boat, later you might want to add a whole heap of things. You might want to look for fish. We couldn't find fish, little fish. So if anyone can make little fish, they're great, because you're going to need them to catch them in your net. And we couldn't find reasonably priced little sheep. We found very expensive little sheep, and you might be prepared to put in a bit of investment in. I would encourage you to do that. Then some nice little things are lovely. Fair Trade in New Zealand have these gorgeous little sheep that are made in, I don't know where it is overseas, but anyway. But sometimes Fair Trade shops, or what are they called here? Are they called? Oh, Trade Aid it might be called in New Zealand, might be Fair Trade here. They sometimes have really lovely animals made overseas, so you can get those. So you probably will need a boat, but remember it won't have a motor on the back. It'll have a single mast and sails. Doesn't matter that the people can't fit in it. It really doesn't matter. My boats are only tiny, and I just move them across the lake to the other side, and then the people go as well. You know, it doesn't have to be hugely, hugely literal.
Do you get the kids to make things?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yep. One of the great things, remember when we're talking about teaching scripture, the idea is to get the kids to do what's called a close reading. You've heard me probably say that before. And the idea is that you look at the text carefully. And with kids who are even in year 3 and 4, if you look at it carefully and say, okay, I need to tell the story. What would help me tell the story? And that's really what you're looking for. And you can look at it carefully and say, okay, what do I need to represent the setting, the place? What do I need? How many dolls am I going to need? As I say, 3 makes a crowd. 3, by the time you've started moving them around, you'll bump them or knock them over if you have too many. There are deliberately not 12, because there were not 12 disciples, there were 17 plus. And I thought if you put 12 in a set, everyone's going to think it's the 12 disciples, and there were more than 12. And 8 is enough to handle. By the time you've got them laying around the place, it really is more than enough to handle. Other little things that you might find at the $2 shop, or Spotlight, or an equivalent place if you're going to another state and you can hang around in Spotlight or Limcraft or one of those stores. You might find little things for a household, little terracotta or pottery dishes. Some of the craft shops sell little buckets for the woman at the well, or even just for householding things. You can sometimes buy little cane brooms, to sweep the house. Look at the story and say what would be good to have to help me tell the story. We've got photos taken at Nazareth Village of actual sites, of the actual village. And so there are some which will actually show the background of houses. There are some that will show the background of vineyards. There are some that will show shepherds and sheep, shepherds shepherding sheep. So you can sometimes laminate those and stand them. I have in my kit one of those little plate stands, and so you can stand a little backdrop or a little background to it. Godly Play in its pure form has some fabulous resources, and if you go to the Godly Play website here in Australia and overseas, you'll actually find a whole array of things. Jerome Berryman, who is the designer of Godly Play, is very prescriptive. What he has is exactly the same universally. If you want to tell the story of the Good Shepherd, you'll have these people and you'll have these sheep and you'll have this boundary fence. I have never been as prescriptive as that, partly because, I don't think you can be really, when you're inviting people to use the story. But, you'll find, you might find some things on his website which look really interesting. How they've got a beautiful temple, which we've got pictures of Beth's wee fellow playing with. So they do have some things, but they are a little bit expensive too. So think outside the square. As primary teachers, you're probably really good at thinking outside the square and deciding what you need and what you can make. But we've tried to give you enough to be able to get a start anyway, to get a hands-on start. Now remember, the idea is you tell the story in your own words, keeping us faithful to the author's intent, not necessarily their absolute text, but their intent. And then you leave the materials for the little ones to play with, so they learn the story. This is a Montessori-based approach to learning. So the idea is that as the kids tell the story, and they will fire questions at you 90 to the dozen about what about this, or what about that, or you didn't say that, and the idea is they learn the story. So if you imagine, Lynn, you were talking before about them not knowing the story very well. This is what we kind of did when we had Noah's Ark kits in Sunday school, didn't we? Or you had the old felt boards, the old felt boards, and you put things up. It's kind of a modern take on a felt board. So they need to be fairly robust, but they also need to be, child friendly, which is why I think I found that this sort of design of doll goes quite nicely. Yeah, the text as the gospel writer writes it, and we're really talking gospel stories here. So I'll say that I always begin my story with saying this is my telling of the story. I always tell them whose book, who we think the author was. So we say, this is a lovely story that Jesus told, and we find this story in Luke's book, Luke's Gospel, Luke's work of the story of Jesus in the Bible. So you give them an author again. If you know it's a literary form, so you're going to say, here we're going to hear a story that Jesus told, or this is a story about Jesus. So again, you give them, it's a narrative. If they're older, you can say to them, this is a narrative. One of my students in the postgrad, the grad cert for accreditation, they had to do the creation story, and she did a unit on teaching the creation story to preps, and she did the second story, and she actually had it worded so beautifully, as she said to them, this is a story that the people wrote to try and talk about how the world began, and you're going to hear about God, and you're going to hear the author call God a gardener and a potter and a whole lot of things, and they rattle off beautifully for 5-year-olds. So we can provide that information if we know it ourselves, and that's probably the big catch. Remember, most common text is narrative. Recount is a narrative without a complication. So, anything else?
Your setting, I think, is natural for us as teachers to tell a story to a group in front of us, but your style was very much having them in a circle or in a... Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Gather around in a really lovely gathering space, thank you, so that they can see. Some kids go absolutely spare, trying to reach out and grab and move and manipulate. So I always try and say, keep it prayerful, keep it, keep the tone and the atmosphere one of reflective sort of thinking. I lower my voice, speak probably in my best sort of storyteller's kind of voice, and try to kind of, ham it up a little bit in the sense of becoming a storyteller. One of the beautiful things Berryman says is that when you tell a story, it's a very personal engagement with the people you tell the story to, as opposed to reading a book. But I think it is important that you read the author's actual words, and sometimes I'll say to children, it might sound a bit different, but you'll still understand it, I'm sure, because you know the story so well. What else? Your I wonder questions.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's good to have you here. After you've told the story and the pieces are sitting here, again, you continue the contemplative kind of mode or atmosphere, and Berryman has these gorgeous things called I wonder, questions on I wonder, and so you would ask the questions, and I kind of ham it up a little bit and say, do you know what I'm wondering about Jesus? I'm wondering about Jesus on this day, whether he felt kind of sad, or whether he felt frustrated about what had happened, or I'm wondering whether he looked at the lawyer and thought, I'm wondering why Jesus told a story. Why didn't he just tell the man, oh, your neighbour is everybody? So you ask I wondering questions. I'm wondering about how people felt. I'm wondering about why that might have happened. I'm wondering if I've ever been in that sort of a position. I'm wondering whether I've ever felt like this person. So they're meant to be reflective questions. They're not meant to be, dare I say, trite questions about, I'm wondering whether, they had leather sandals on, or, whether they were barefoot. or, they're meant to be provocative, Berryman calls them existential questions, questions about life, questions about meaning, questions about me, about people, about life. I'm wondering when we remember to say I'm sorry. I'm wondering when we remember to say thank you. I'm wondering what I might have done if I'd been there. I'm wondering which character I like. I'm wondering which one I would like to be like. So they're meant to be those questions about existence and about life and about, making sense out of the reality.